You think you understand confidence, don't you? You've seen it paraded around social media, plastered across self-help books, whispered in motivational speeches that promise to transform your life in 30 days or less. But what you've been fed is a counterfeit, a shadow dancing on the wall of Plato's cave while the real fire burns behind you, unseen and unacknowledged. Nietzsche knew this. He saw through the charade of what society calls confidence and identified something far more profound, far more dangerous, and infinitely more powerful. The truly confident don't need to announce their arrival because their presence rewrites the very fabric of the room they enter. They don't seek validation because they've already validated themselves in the crucible of their own becoming. They don't fear rejection because they've learned to reject the very need for external approval that keeps most people chained to mediocrity. But here's what cuts deepest, what most people refuse to acknowledge. Your desperate attempts at confidence are actually confessions of your deepest insecurities. Every time you puff out your chest, every time you speak louder to command attention, every time you name drop or flex your accomplishments, you're screaming to the world that you need their permission to exist. And Nietzsche would have seen right through you. He understood that the will to power isn't about dominating others. It's about mastering yourself so completely that external validation becomes irrelevant. It's about becoming who you are, not who others expect you to be. The most powerful trait of the truly confident isn't what you think it is. It's not charisma, though they may possess it. It's not fearlessness, though they act despite fear. It's not even self-assurance, though they embody it naturally. The most powerful trait of the truly confident is their relationship with solitude. They don't just tolerate being alone, they require it, they crave it. They protect it like a sacred flame because they understand what Nietzsche meant when he said that one must have chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star. In solitude, they commune with their shadows, they wrestle with their demons, they question their assumptions and rebuild their beliefs from the ground up. You see, most people fear being alone with themselves because they can't stand what they find there. The silence reveals the lies they've been telling themselves, the ways they've betrayed their own values, the dreams they've abandoned for the comfort of conformity. But the truly confident have made peace with their darkness. They've integrated what Jung called the shadow, those aspects of themselves they'd rather deny. They don't pretend to be perfect because they understand that perfection is the enemy of authenticity, and authenticity is the foundation upon which real confidence is built. Think about the people in your life who you genuinely respect, who command attention without demanding it, who seem to possess an unshakable core that remains steady regardless of external circumstances. Notice how comfortable they are with silence. Notice how they don't fill every pause in conversation with nervous chatter. Notice how they can sit with discomfort, both their own and others, without rushing to fix or change or manipulate the situation. This isn't learned behavior. It's the natural result of someone who has spent serious time in dialogue with themselves. Nietzsche called this process becoming who you are, and it's perhaps the most misunderstood concept in all of philosophy. Most people think it means discovering some pre-existing authentic self, like unwrapping a gift that was always there. But that's not what Nietzsche meant at all. He meant the active, ongoing process of self-creation, of choosing who you become through every decision, every challenge, every moment of crisis. The truly confident understand that they are not victims of their circumstances, but artists of their own existence, constantly sculpting themselves through the choices they make and the values they embody. This is why they can stand alone, not because they don't value relationships or connection, but because they don't need others to complete them. They enter relationships as whole beings seeking to share their completeness, not as broken halves desperate to find their missing piece. And this, paradoxically, makes them infinitely more attractive and magnetic than those who cling and grasp and demand constant reassurance. People are drawn to those who are at peace with themselves, because that peace is contagious. It offers a glimpse of what's possible when you stop outsourcing your self-worth to others. But let's be brutally honest about what this means for you. If you're listening to this and feeling uncomfortable, if you're recognizing yourself in the desperate behaviors I've described, if you're realizing that your confidence has been more performance than authenticity, then you're exactly where you need to be. Discomfort is the price of growth, and growth is the price of becoming truly confident. You can't skip the hard work of self-examination, the painful process of confronting your own contradictions, the lonely journey of learning to be your own best company. Most people would rather maintain comfortable delusions than face uncomfortable truths. But you're not most people, are you? You wouldn't be here listening to this if you were content with the mediocrity that masquerades as confidence in our culture. You sense there's something more, something deeper, something that can't be faked or performed or purchased. You're right, there is, but it requires you to do what Nietzsche demanded of his readers, to become who you are, not who you think you should be or who others expect you to be. The path begins in solitude, but not the kind of solitude that's really just escape from responsibility or connection. The kind of solitude that's active, intentional, confrontational. The kind where you sit with your thoughts without immediately reaching for your phone, where you examine your motivations without immediately justifying them, where you question your beliefs without immediately defending them. This is the laboratory where true confidence is forged, not in the approval of others, but in the crucible of honest self-assessment. And here's what you'll discover in that solitude if you're brave enough to go there. You're both worse and better than you thought. Worse because you'll have to acknowledge the ways you've been living inauthentically, the compromises you've made, the times you've betrayed your own values for comfort or acceptance. Better because you'll also discover strengths you didn't know you had. Capacities for courage and creativity and love that have been dormant, waiting for you to claim them. The truly confident don't need to convince anyone of their worth because they've done the work of convincing themselves, and that conviction runs so deep that it becomes unshakable. They don't fear criticism because they've already criticized themselves more thoroughly than any external judge ever could. They don't fear failure because they understand that failure is just feedback, information they can use to adjust course and grow stronger. They don't fear success because they know their worth isn't dependent on their achievements. This is what Nietzsche meant by the Übermensch, the overman. Not some fascistic Superman dominating others, but someone who has overcome the need for external validation, who has transcended the herd mentality that keeps most people trapped in cycles of comparison and competition. The truly confident have moved beyond the petty games of status and recognition into something far more substantial. The quiet satisfaction of knowing they are becoming who they are meant to be. So if you want to develop real confidence, the kind that can't be shaken by circumstances or criticism, start with solitude. Learn to be alone with yourself without distraction, without judgment, without the constant need to be productive or entertained. Sit with your discomfort, examine your fears, question your assumptions, and slowly, patiently, courageously, begin the work of becoming who you are. Not who you think you should be, not who others expect you to be, but who you are when all the masks come off and all the performances end. The world doesn't need another person pretending to be confident. It needs people who have found their center, who know their worth, who can stand alone and choose to connect from a place of wholeness rather than need. That's the most powerful trait of the truly confident, and it's available to you if you're willing to do the work that most people aren't. The question is, are you ready to stop performing confidence and start embodying it? But let me tell you what this journey actually looks like, because the romantic notions you have about self-discovery are probably as far from reality as your current understanding of confidence. This isn't a weekend retreat or a 30-day challenge or some mystical awakening that happens while you're meditating on a mountaintop. This is the slow, sometimes brutal process of dismantling everything you thought you knew about yourself and rebuilding from the foundation up. Nietzsche called it philosophizing with a hammer, and he meant it literally. You have to be willing to strike at the idols you've created, the false gods of approval and acceptance that have been ruling your life from the shadows. You'll discover that most of your personality is borrowed. The way you laugh, the opinions you hold, the dreams you think are yours. So much of it is just cultural programming, family conditioning, peer pressure, dressed up as personal choice. The truly confident have done the terrifying work of separating what is genuinely theirs from what they've inherited or absorbed from others. They've asked themselves the hardest question of all. If I stripped away everything I think I'm supposed to be, what would be left? And they've been willing to sit with the answer, even when that answer is initially not much. This is why solitude becomes so crucial and why it's so different from loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of separation from others. Solitude is the choice to be separate in order to discover who you are when no one else is watching, when no one else's expectations are influencing your behavior. when no one else's energy is mixing with yours and clouding your perception of yourself. In solitude, you learn to distinguish between your authentic voice and the chorus of other voices that have been speaking through you without your permission. And here's what nobody tells you about this process. It's going to make you weird. Not quirky weird, not socially acceptable weird, but genuinely, uncomfortably different from the people around you. The truly confident often find themselves increasingly unable to participate in the games that occupy most people's lives. The gossip, the status competitions, the endless cycles of complaint and blame that pass for conversation in our culture. They develop what Nietzsche called intellectual probity, a commitment to truth that makes casual dishonesty impossible, even the kind of harmless social lying that lubricates most interactions. This doesn't make them antisocial or arrogant. If anything, it makes them more compassionate because they understand how much suffering comes from living inauthentically. But it does make them selective. They can no longer pretend to care about things that don't matter to them. They can no longer nod along with conversations that drain their energy or compromise their values. They develop what some people mistake for aloofness, but is really just discernment. The ability to distinguish between connections that nourish and connections that deplete. You see, most people are energy vampires without even realizing it. They use relationships as emotional regulation systems, constantly seeking others to make them feel better about themselves, to validate their choices, to provide the stability they haven't learned to create internally. The truly confident have broken this pattern. They've learned to be their own source of emotional regulation, which means they can be present with others without needing anything from them. This is magnetic in a way that performed confidence never is, because people can feel the difference between someone who needs them and someone who chooses them. But this transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without casualties. You'll lose friends who were only connected to the version of you that sought their approval. You'll disappoint family members who preferred you when you were easier to control. You'll find yourself alone more often, not because you're antisocial, but because you've raised your standards for how you spend your time and energy. And this is where most people turn back. They decide that authentic confidence is too expensive, that it costs too much in terms of social acceptance and familiar comfort. But if you push through this phase, if you can tolerate the discomfort of being misunderstood, of being judged, of sometimes being genuinely alone with your choices, you'll discover something extraordinary. You don't actually need most of what you thought you needed. The approval you've been chasing, the validation you've been seeking, the sense of belonging you've been trying to earn, none of it is necessary for your happiness or your sense of worth. What's necessary is the relationship you build with yourself in those hours of solitude, the trust you develop in your own judgment, the confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever life presents, because you've already handled the hardest challenge of all, being honest about who you are. Nietzsche understood that this journey is fundamentally creative. You're not discovering who you are, you're creating who you are, moment by moment, choice by choice, value by value. The truly confident are artists of their own existence, constantly sculpting themselves according to their own vision, rather than trying to fit into molds created by others. This requires an enormous amount of courage because it means taking full responsibility for your life, no longer blaming your parents or your circumstances or your past for who you've become, but owning your power to decide who you're becoming. And this ownership changes everything. When you stop being a victim of your circumstances and start being the author of your story, confidence becomes as natural as breathing. You don't have to work at it or think about it or perform it, because it's simply the natural result of living in alignment with your authentic self. You don't second-guess your decisions because you made them from a place of clarity and self-knowledge. You don't worry about what others think because you've already thought deeply about what you think, and that's enough. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote about amor fati, love of fate. The truly confident don't just accept their circumstances, they embrace them, they find meaning in them. They use them as raw material for their ongoing self-creation. They understand that everything that has happened to them, including the painful and difficult experiences, has contributed to who they are and who they're becoming. They don't waste energy wishing things had been different because they're too busy making the most of things as they are. But perhaps the most radical aspect of this transformation is how it changes your relationship with failure and success. Most people are terrified of failure because they've tied their self-worth to their achievements. And they're equally terrified of success because deep down, they don't believe they deserve it. The truly confident have transcended both fears because they understand that neither failure nor success defines them. They are not their accomplishments or their mistakes. They are the consciousness that experiences both, learns from both, and continues growing regardless of external outcomes. This perspective gives them an almost supernatural resilience. They can take risks that paralyze others because they know that even if things don't work out, they'll be fine. They can pursue ambitious goals without attachment to specific outcomes because the pursuit itself is what matters, the process of stretching and growing and becoming more than they were. They can handle criticism without defensive reactions because they've already criticized themselves more thoroughly than any external judge ever could, and they've separated their worth from their performance. And here's the paradox that Nietzsche would have appreciated. The less you need others' approval, the more likely you are to earn their respect. The less you try to impress people, the more impressive you become. The less you perform confidence, the more confident you appear. This isn't a strategy or a technique. It's the natural result of becoming genuinely comfortable with who you are, shadows and light, strengths and weaknesses, successes and failures all included. So when you're sitting in that solitude, when you're doing the hard work of honest self-examination, remember that you're not just improving yourself, you're freeing yourself. You're breaking the chains of external validation that have kept you small and scared and dependent on others for your sense of worth. You're reclaiming your power to define yourself, to create your own meaning, to live according to your own values rather than the values that have been imposed on you by others. The truly confident understand that this freedom is both a gift and a responsibility. Once you know who you are, once you've found your center, once you've learned to stand alone, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to the comfortable delusions that once protected you from the weight of your own agency. You have to live consciously, deliberately, authentically, and that's both more challenging and more rewarding than anything you've experienced before. This is your invitation to begin that journey, not tomorrow or next week or when you feel ready, but now, in this moment, with whatever courage you can muster. The path to authentic confidence starts with a single step into solitude, a single moment of honest self-reflection, a single choice to value truth over comfort. And once you take that step, once you commit to becoming who you are rather than who you think you should be, everything changes. The question isn't whether you're capable of this transformation. You are. The question is whether you're willing to pay the price, and whether you understand that the price of not changing is ultimately much higher than the price of growth. If this message resonated with something deep inside you, if you felt that uncomfortable recognition of truth that Nietzsche knew was the beginning of all real transformation, then you're part of a rare group of people who are ready to do the work that most won't. Don't let this moment pass without action. Subscribe to this channel because we're building a community of individuals committed to authentic growth. People who understand that real confidence can't be faked or performed, but must be forged in the fire of honest self-examination. Hit that like button if you're ready to choose truth over comfort, growth over stagnation, authenticity over approval. And leave a comment below sharing one insight from today's exploration that struck you most powerfully. Not because I need your validation, but because your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to begin their own journey toward genuine confidence. The truly confident understand that we rise by lifting others, that sharing our struggles and breakthroughs creates the kind of connection that transcends the superficial relationships that drain most people's energy. So join this conversation. Add your voice to this community of seekers who refuse to settle for the counterfeit confidence that our culture peddles, and let's continue this exploration together of what it really means to become who we are.